Okay, entangled histories, divergent readings, perceptions of blackletter across European contexts. A note, I'm really at the beginning of this. This is a pilot study. I've collected data. I'm bringing that to the room today. I'm trying out something, how I might connect this with theory, indexical orders, and I would love to hear your thoughts. But this is an explorative stage. So I'm a German, as you can hear, living in the UK, and moving here with my graphic socialization, I realized, ooh, blackletter is used very differently in this environment. And I got interested and wanted to know how are blackletter typefaces and scripts used and perceived in contemporary semiotic landscapes and international comparison, and what are the differences in ascribed meanings and interpretations between regions. And I've picked the UK, France, and Germany because these are places, I'll talk about that later, but places where I can do interviews and get insights about that. How do I look at this? Of course, I positioned this as a typographic landscape research project, exploring the form of language and how it's socially meaningful. I'm interested in the impact of graphic socialization, the graphic knowledge people bring to the urban space, on typeface perception, typographic meaning making. I want to explore the indexical field of this specific type style that has multiple subgroups. And I want to see if I can, as I said, link this to the concept of indexical orders, how this could be employed following the way it's been used by Johnston, employed to understand the indexical historical layering of this particular style and the enregisterment through time. And Blommett's thinking around semiotization of time and space along scales is helpful for me too. To lay this out, I'm going to very quickly map the central blackletter styles in chronological order onto Silverstein's indexical orders, and see how this might work or not. You tell me. The history is very complex and long, and I will just say to very few key development stages. So Gothic letterforms developed from the Carolingian minuscule in the 11th century in Europe. You have regional variations emerging. There are rounder, rotunda forms in southern regions, think Italy, and narrower textura forms in central and western regions, France, Low Countries, then England and Germany. The salient point here is that it's used across all these regions and languages. And then Fraktur comes in and it becomes quickly the prominent printing typeface from the 16th century into the early 20th century. And you can read this if you want as the first indexical order. People in that specific region and time, as Johnston would put it, just write and print that way. So the feature can be correlated with a socio-demographic identity, but it's not yet used to do socially meaningful work. This happens a bit later in the 19th century. The question of which script to choose becomes increasingly politicized and ideological in Germany, particularly in rivalry with France. And the Antiqua Fraktur dispute culminates in 1911, when the Reichstag narrowly rejects a proposal to adopt Roman letter forms generally throughout Germany. It's a very close vote. Another close vote that was consequential, where the first order was just the potential for indexicality. Now here, the feature becomes enregistered and blackletter becomes tied to the German nation and is claimed that the German language would be best represented in blackletter as if there would be an inherent connection. So it becomes a marker, it becomes socially meaningful. The next layer, one could argue, in 1933, the National Socialists declare blackletter as the German Volksschrift, and start using it widely in fascist propaganda. Shaw and Bain call this the fatal blow. The use through that period, for good reason, the strongest stereotype today, connected to the script. An indexical order, the script cannot, of course, you can never recover from an indexical order, but you cannot recover from this fatal blow. In a sense, that script. Because new meaning is built on old, it always carries this history of use throughout, embedded in graphic knowledge, and in a way, historical facts, such as the Fraktura ban, in 1941 are somewhat irrelevant because it's sticky what happens with a typeface, and graphic knowledge builds, and that's what counts, what people interpret. It doesn't stop here. New layers, new variations are being developed. And what I want to do now in this presentation is to map the image data that I collected and the associations verbalized in interviews onto these layers and see whether certain meanings are mobilized more in some geographical regions than other. To tell you a bit about how I collected my data, I walked 15 days, 25 kilometers each across London, Paris, and Berlin. I collected 9,769 images, and over 1,000 of these contain blackletter. Why did I choose the countries? They're primary sites of where blackletter scripts originated, and the capitals as places where various typographic traditions converge. I selected 8 neighborhoods of varying affluence, linguistic diversity, and social structure, focusing on streets that have a mix of small businesses, restaurants, markets, youth culture. And the goal was to collect the full typographic tapestry. Then we took, my wonderful research assistant Emma took these 1,075 blackletter items and tagged them in Notion along 16 parameters: discourse type, the subtype styles, materiality, area of use. I've done, to this point, not enough, but 18 interviews exploring intentions, interpretations, perceptions with 3 groups. Most of them, to this point, are sign creators, so shop owners or organizations who produce items that use blackletter, designers, experts, activists, or passers-by on the street. Usually these are non-designers. And to find more out about perceptions and interpretations, I've set up a pilot study to explore nuances in the perception of letter shapes. I've asked for associations, evaluating 4 type styles, 2 blackletter, 2 controls in a semantic differential scale, 12 pairs, and I matched 18 expected areas of use against these 4 typefaces. When we look at the image data, I have 3 slides with quantitative things, just a few differences to highlight before I go into more qualitative things. When we look at Berlin, the ratio, the percentage in Berlin of blackletter is much higher. And I thought, of course, that must be historic signage, that must be street signs. Oh, it's not. It's actually stickers. It's the self-authorized items that use blackletter predominantly. Comparing this now to London and Paris, in London, there's also quite a lot of self-authorized items with 50%, but not as much as Berlin with 66 on the right. And in Paris, it's quite different. Blackletter is mostly used in restaurant, cafe, hospitality, so in the commercial realm, signage. Looking at the actual sub-styles used, there are some interesting things. So I said Textura is one of the oldest styles used across all these regions. Textura is still used across all these cities. You see it at the top in green. Paris has no Fraktur. And you remember, historically, it's more a northern thing. So to date, it's not in Paris, although obviously the typefaces we see here are either really lettering or they are standard things you can find globally online. But then Paris has a very high percentage of interesting, experimental, contemporary hybrid things. I'm showing you the orders again. I'm now going to go through the image data and going to build this up. And you're going to see this again after I've shown you some image slides. I'm going to build up the associations along that line. Okay, something that struck me as very interesting is the use, and very particular, is the use of blackletter in Paris sweets shops, chocolatier, patisserie, things where the shop owners say it's elegant, it's valuable, it's established, and passers-by say it's delicious. It also made hint to something being produced à l'ancienne in a traditional way. So that was something I haven't found in German or British contexts at all. Something, sort of an association you find a commonality you find everywhere is food packaging, hospitality signs, some book covers, if it links to religion or old as an association or official documents. A particularity that's very strong in the London context is context that signifies storytelling and fairy tales, mystery magic, so the whole Harry Potter world and beyond. Again, many bookshops form part of this, and talking about books. This is something that really impressed me after I moved, that in a bookshop you find blackletter used in referencing a whole range of historic and contemporary cultural references. And it seems there's a far more relaxed relationship in the use of it, signifying a different sort of religious, historic indexicalities. Particularly in Paris and Berlin, you have restaurant signage, and we could think about here, this is tradition and heritage, but it's also starting to link to what I've called the indexical order to regionality. So when I spoke to people in Paris and saying, what do you think, what kind of food do you get? Multiple times interpreted, it might be the French-German border region of Alsace. So they were sort of leaning towards Germany, but clearly in German context, it's a very specific kind of food. It refers to British. It's clearly you will not find any of that. The British pub and restaurant signage tradition is very different. It was interesting for me to see that these are on the left photos from London, in the middle photos from Paris, and you find Britishness and Germanness indexed through blackletter choices here in a very interesting tea package at Maria Schreck. So surprise find for me. Blackletter referencing Frenchness, absolutely not. Moving one indexical order up when it comes to the strongest stereotype, the most salient, most conventionalized level, in the German context particularly, blackletter referencing fascism and the right-wing ideologies. You have many cases where the typographic form iconically represents the linguistic content, and just the linguistic content. So rechts, AfD, voting the right is so 1933 and 1933. Interestingly, these reduced Gothic typefaces did not have these kind of numerals. They had Antiqua numerals. So, but the reference clearly works. You know the point in time that's referred to, that the party here does not wish to see repeated. So you have a semiotically performed construction of the right-wing other. It's somehow visual critical blackletter use, and that's very specific to the German context. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Good. I'm going from this, something happens, and that's where probably what I'm trying to do becomes muddy. There is the actual evil and the bad and the dangerous connotation, and then in the 60s it quickly flips into thinking what Sex Pistols did with a blackletter and swastikas. It becomes the provocative, the rebellious, the anti, the tough. This is in and of itself a huge world, clothing, protest signs, and so on. I'm coming to the next order up, and that is something that really surprised me. And what I found particularly interesting. So now it's not just part of the message, it's now the entire message. It's champagne against the right. It is vote love, it is freedom, peace. And I've spoken to, juxtaposition of content and form, at the same time confirming this highest order, this most registered tied to fascism indexicality, but at the same time they're critiquing it and inverting it and linking it with positive messages. Speaking to them, the thing I heard most was blackletter doesn't belong to the right. They're fighting about the semiotic resource. They point out in yellow, however, it provokes, and that's what I want. It bites. But then there are also statements like this one here in pink. I love it because for me, blackletter has to do with love because it's calligraphic, handmade, care and attention. It's a typeface of fairy tales and hopeful things. So I'm wondering if there's actually an attempt to try to create new meaning from old meaning and try to re-register or signify and reclaim what's to be perceived a right-wing typeface. Hold fast to your seats. This is going to be very, my student assistant calls this the word vomit graph. And I'm just going to throw it out there. So what you see is the items are found, underlined and voiced in interviews, labels by participants. To summarize, sorry, that was quick, huh? Sorry. The question in the interview data, there are clear differences between the regions. In Britain, you have many occurrences of this Gothic storytelling and the wide spectrum of cultural artifacts. In Germany, it is very political, much more political than I would have thought. Old meanings are being invigorated and in creatively ways re-semiotized and challenging perceptions. And I mentioned it. I'm pointing at you. I'm hoping for intel on the French chocolate sweet shop connection. Very quickly on the survey results because they link very much with the images. So this is the first question. You see here the red lines is the German respondents, the French are in blue, and the UK in green. In response to what feelings or qualities are suggested, we see that on Helvetica, all respondents more or less agree. When it comes to, oh, yeah, good. When it comes to looking at the two blackletter styles, we see, which surprised me, but then again, of course, it doesn't, that the red lines of the German participants always and here even stronger, they go into more extremes. They perceive it as even better, the worse, as even older, as even more suspicious and ugly and conservative and nationalist and authoritarian, which makes sense, but also I didn't necessarily expect it. So there is a visible difference between the regions. I was very interested in age groups. And I was thinking young people see it completely differently. They don't. So the region is a far stronger influence on how it's perceived than the age group. However, younger people older people see these two blackletter forms as slightly more nationalistic than younger people, but not as much as I would have expected. I can do it. Typeface appropriateness in areas of use. So I'm asking people, where do you think that fits? Again, German respondents red, French blue, UK green. Let's look at the official level. In the UK, on banknotes and legal documents and university diplomas, high agreement. Germans, not so much. On shop signs, of course, exactly what I found. French, blue, absolutely. Restaurants, yes. High agreement here. When it comes to cultural production, interesting. This does not link with what I found, that textura styles have been seen by a French participant as a widely used cultural thing. I didn't see that, but when we look at the reduced Gothic, the UK using it on newspapers and book covers, that's exactly what I found. The one thing that is explaining a lot what happens on the stickers is this red dot here when it comes to political campaigns as opposed to art. So this is almost flipped, like the Germans see it as something pretty political, whereas in the UK and France, it's seen as an artistic thing, in tendency, not absolutes, and a small number, and it's a pilot study. And here again, we have younger people in the UK and France, just in the UK and France, not in Germany, associating blackletter more and higher in the cultural production range. That's what I would have expected looking at what my students wear as t-shirts, that's a more normal thing. Whereas with the German graphic socialization, blackletter on a t-shirt, no. In my age group. I have no conclusion, but I have a summary. So I found some significant regional differences in the image data, in the perceptions, and very, very interesting, I haven't reported that fully, points in the interviews. The interviews show that multiple meanings coexist in indexical layers, and regional history of use makes some orders more prominent for some viewers than others. For example, this owner of this restaurant is daily confronted with people asking him if he's not quite all right and if he knows what he's doing with this typeface. Whereas at the top, the owner of Chocolaterie was very happy and never had any complaints. Which shows how political blackletter is in Berlin. That's one thing it shows. For me, the biggest surprise, as I mentioned, were these positive messages. And that might seem like tiny and insignificant, but considering how widely it's perceived as super bad and ugly and suspicious, that is semiotically an interesting move, trying to reclaim it and do something with it now, at this point in time, looking where we are with political visual communication, strengthening right-wing movements, going in there and mobilizing this. I need to think about it more, but something exciting is happening there, I think. You tell me, I'm wondering if my approach to orders of indexicality might be a way to trace how this layers and how resemiotization happens and how this indexical field around blackletter develops. I'm interested in the fact that the geographical scale seems to be more dominant. So it's more important where you are, how you perceive it, as opposed to how old you are. That surprises me. And another very important point, and I'm going to stop in 1 second. That's what needs far more attention now. The formal material specificity is the thing I think that really shifts perception. So there is a reason also why the Baroque letter shapes in gold are far less aggressive than the reduced Gothic black and white. It's this sort of semiotic not alignment of pink and the addition of these symbols here that break the mold. And that's what needs to happen for it to work. And that is actually quite creative and complex. And that's what needs further attention. So I might then conclude that this small exploration allowed me to point to something bigger, namely that letter forms are quite dynamic and time and space-bound cultural artifacts whose layered meaning-making potential sits within a quite complex frame of influential factors, but it can be challenged and people try to actively resignify things. And that's it. Thank you.